so honored to be able to share this stage with you, and I know you share my sentiment. Yes.
Yes, I do. I do. But I had the honor already in Germany, so you go ahead, share your praises.
Okay, fine. We are here to talk to you about your body of work, your very incredible body of work. You have The First Woman, you have Manchester Happened, you have the beloved Chintu. So I'd like to start with Chintu. I mean, you wrote a book that has such international acclaim. It's won awards. Did you ever think when you were writing this book that it was going to go this far, this wide? Did you for a second think, wow, this is going to blow everybody's minds the way it has blown our minds? And with all the recognition it's gotten, has your perception of the book changed till now?
First of all, thank you. Thank you very much. Lola thinks this is an experiment, but I'm loving it. I'm loving because it's sitting between two people. And thank you for everybody who's turned up. Nigeria is my second home in terms of book buyers. Perhaps I should say this, Lola. Thank you for the last 10 years. I just needed to say this. I've sold more books here at Ake more than anywhere else, to the point that normally my books are sold out before my panel, and then I throw a half, oh, my books are sold out. This is the first time I've done a panel and there are books, and I'm like, yes. So my publisher in Britain found out that Africans are readers through Ake, and she knows this is her largest market for my books. And a lot of publishers in Britain now are taking the African markets seriously because of Ake. So thank you for that. And thank you for connecting those of us who are so flung away from the world, from Africa to the continent. Because I come here and I meet my readers, and I have some of the craziest readers out here in Nigeria. They write to me, you know, I'm in here. Okay. I have someone who says, oh, I'm the president of your book fan readers. You know, there's so much going on here that when I come to Nigeria, I know I am home. But I've also made most of my writer friends here, you know, and I'm carrying them with me long after this thing has ended. And often whenever we meet elsewhere in Europe, we talk about Ake. And I'm telling you, we don't talk about the panels. We talk about the food. Oh my God, we prepare for the food. Thank you for the hosts that you have prepared for us all these years. Thank you for everything, but most of all, thank you for the memories. Oh, so about the question. Did I know whether Chintu would do very well?
As well as it has done.
First of all, no. I don't think any author working on a book ever knows that this is going to be the book, this is going to do very well. We all have our suspicions, we have our dreams. But I don't know about other authors, but we tend to be terribly insecure. Often you're like, oh, this is the one that is going to tank. Oh, and probably the good thing about Chintu is that I was so naive. I was so unaware of the world that I just went out guns blazing. I think I should include that. I should include that. And remember, The First Woman had been rejected for between 2003 and 2008. It was probably rejected 50 times. So Chintu, remember, is my second book. No, actually, my third book. But I had no hopes for it. I just did, because I had been rejected so badly before, I was like, I'm going to do exactly as I wish. Sorry. So remember, it was also published in Africa because it was rejected in Europe. And it was the Africans, the Kenyans first, and then the Ugandans who started talking about it. And then the Nigerians picked it up. And that's when it went absolutely wild. So yes, it has won Western awards, and it has done very well in the West, but the West rejected it. And I'm not very forgiving. So I'm always thinking about it as the book that was made by the word of mouth of African readers.
Yes, speaking of how much the African readership did for you regarding this book, I remember very well in Germany how her book has been translated into German language, which is like amazing. It's kind of the thing, and we talked about it at the International Book Festival. And I remember how I read in an article that you said this book, your readership, this book is for Africans, it's for Ugandans, and you are not trying to write it for Europeans.
Yeah.
And that, when I read this sentence, I said, yes, finally there's a swift. So what made you actually, when you were confronted, obviously with the rejections, what made you, when you were confronted, should you tailor your book more for a European, for a white readership? And you said no, intentionally. Even when we spoke about it, you said it, and they laughed, and I laughed even louder.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I was lucky I grew up on the continent. You know, so, but I grew up reading Western novels. I made most of my African novels in class, but I was, you know, the African middle class, they put you on Western readers immediately. The parents are like, oh, and my generation, we did Secret 7, Famous 5, and then my dad was immediately on all the abridged forms and whatever. So I grew up on those books. And then I went to school and I studied literature. And then I went to university and I studied literature. And then I studied more literature. And then I studied more literature. Closer. But all that time, I was aware that all these books that I was reading, I was an outsider. I was also aware that none of those authors thought of me, an African, at the equator as their reader. None of them ever went out of their way to make those books understandable for a reader like me. So why the hell would I write my books and explain myself to the West? I had this stupid idea that we all read other books from other places, other outsiders, you know. I've read from all around the world, and thank God for my Ugandan education, because I read Russian literature, South American literature, American literature, and of course, British literature, and what is now Nigerian literature, but we used to call it African literature. And all that time, I was aware that I'm an outsider, okay? And I thought that all the world reads like that, except for the literature that is from your world. So I always wrote with my world in mind, but hoping that the whole world would understand it. And I always explain it this way, that literature, or good literature, is like a mirror, okay? When I'm doing it, when I'm writing it, I'm focused on myself and people like me. But when I step away from that mirror, whoever steps in front of it is going to see themselves in that mirror. So why on earth would I try to think about the British reader, the American reader, the German reader? Hell no. I think about the Ugandan reader, and I think about the West African reader, because the Nigerian market is very important to me. And because in Uganda we don't speak the same languages, and we are quite apart from each other, once the Bantu understand, that is the whole of, half of Africa catered for. And then I think of those who don't speak Bantu languages, but are always Africans. Once I've done that, the rest of the world can fit themselves into my books if they're interested. If not, too bad.
See why I like her? Can you imagine her saying the same thing to an entirely white audience, and we're sitting there, say, yes, it's like that. And they were looking at us. So that's another thing. And one thing I love particularly as well, the concept of feminism, where you said the West has actually made themselves to believe that they invented it. And again, stunned faces. Yeah, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, on your perception of feminism in an African context.
Okay, now that is the first woman.
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
So remember this, the first woman is my first novel that was rejected. And I was told it's too African. So, which was a compliment. But here's the thing. The first woman starts in 1975. Now, people of a certain age, you know 1975 is when we had Mexico City World Women Conference. For us in Uganda, that was the first time people, actually ordinary people, hard women had collected somewhere and they were making demands and they were speaking in English, and there was such a pro in Uganda. And I remember people starting to talk, women, they don't want to go to labor wards now. They want us to get pregnant. They want us to go to the kitchens. And so when I started writing this book, I started there, because that's when Western feminism made a stand in Africa. And it came in a big way. It came with manifestos, with people marching, with movements, with icons. And so what Ugandans did, they took this Western feminism and made it Ugandan. But as I grew older, I started to see gaps between that Western feminism and what was happening in Uganda, to women in Uganda. And you don't have to be extremely intelligent to know that women oppression is culturally specific. The way women were oppressed in the West is not the way women are oppressed in Uganda. So, and I always say to people, women in the West had to fight to start to vote. In Africa, we never heard of that. I mean, we started voting and we all turned up. Now, you won't believe this, but in the West, women used to pay dowry to husbands. I know, you know. In Uganda, it's the opposite way. In the West, children tend to be associated more to the mothers. In Uganda, women are close to an oven. You bake the child and you hand over to the dad and his family. So do you see what I'm talking about? That feminism coming to Uganda was not going to be very helpful in everything. It was wonderful to show people that, you know what, women have a brain, they do this, they're oppressed and da-da-da-da. But we needed something of our own. And it's until when I was studying literature in Uganda, we started with oral traditions, because this was the course where we were introduced to literature. And I was immediately told that this is the literature your ancestors left behind for you. And actually this literature, most of those stories, the myths, the legends, the folk tales, they are all coded texts. That when what you tell as a child, it is so different from the text when you grow older. And I started to look at these oral traditional tales, and most of them are feminist. But they are coded, you have to decode them, okay? So once I started looking at them, I found what my ancestors, my grandmothers, my mothers, what they left behind. Because for them, the way they were oppressed, they wouldn't say, oh, men are oppressing us, and da-da-da-da. They told stories, you know? And they told these stories to their children, and they passed on to me. When I started to look at African feminism, I went to those traditional stories. Because remember, wherever a woman was oppressed, there was anti-feminist ideas. You know very well that your grandmother, your great-grandmother, they had they had feminist strategies. You know, I know women's spaces where they would sit and say, you know, women, men are like children. This is what you do. Don't argue with him. Make him feel like he's a king. But you do ABCD. You're going to run his life by doing ABCD. These are all feminist ideas. So how could we not have had feminism in Africa if we were already oppressed? You know? So now I had to turn it around in this book and say, this is my feminism. This is indigenous feminism. This is where we started. And for it, I thought it was a wonderful idea to start introducing children when they're young to feminism and start with the ABCD. So this is where you see that old woman saying, this is where it started. Once upon a time, women were big, we were tall, we were loud, we were strong, but then this happened. And this is what we need to do to reverse it.
Thank you so much. Something I like about The First Woman, and I like about so many other books, is I like when the protagonists were introduced to them when they are very young. So was it on purpose? Did this story come to you like this, that your main character would begin at such a young age? Did it come to you, or was it something that just progressed as you wrote the book?
Yes. My books always start with a character, you know, and Kirabo had to be young, but I just didn't know how young. So when I started writing, I kept on drawing her age. So she was born in 1963. So when do I open the book? Because for most authors, we know what happened before the book started, and we know what happened after the book ended. But the question was, where do I start with her, which age? And I decided at the cusp of 12, when she's just about to hit 13. Because in my culture, a lot of things happen then to a girl who is about to join, to become a teenager. So it was very important. But as you know, children, main characters are very useful. You can get away with murder with a child character. Because if you don't want to highlight something huge, use a child character, because it's going to show it to you from a child's point of view. And that allows the reader to draw their conclusions. And they tend to be unreliable anyway, you know. And I do love an unreliable narrator. And they tend to be unaware of themselves. So I reveal her to the reader without Kirabo knowing who she is, you know. And so I had set it in Idi Amin's regime. Now, Idi Amin is huge, huge. He was a huge man, but he's also huge. You put him in your novel, he takes over. But if you are seeing Idi Amin from a child's point of view, especially in African cultures where children are protected from certain knowledges, so he comes in bit by bit, and I expect you to know better than she does. So that was also pretty useful. But the most important thing was that I needed her to start learning about indigenous feminisms from a child's point of view, okay? And this is why, therefore, I bring all these traditional stories that are feminist, and this woman is giving them to her. And Kirabo is not saying what the stories are doing, but you, as a reader, can see that.
Thank you.
I think if every time you are clapping when she finishes, you are reducing our speaking time. But that is what I find particularly intriguing, because the story is set up a young child that turns into, well, adolescence and is looking for her mother. So that's kind of the setup. Yeah. And then you follow her, you really give the reader the journey to travel with her, to develop and grow. And I like the way it is it's finessed within it, because you are tackling very, very strong theses, actually making very strong points that as an adult reader, you do realize what is the underlying tone with it. As you said, you expect to do better. And I want to say, it was masterfully done, and I really enjoyed it in the reading story. So, and what you also did is you introduced us particularly to culturally Ugandan things. You had particularly words for basically feminism. Maybe you could repeat that word and pronounce it.
Wenkanon.
Yes, we tried to teach it to the German audience, and we were, close to successful, right? Close to, maybe you could say something to that particular concept of. Say it again, please. Louder, please.
So if I'm going to introduce indigenous feminism, so why should I give it a Western term, you know? But also here's the thing. I'm writing in English, okay? It's my second language. I learned the language in class, okay? And we all know that language is the vehicle through which culture travels, okay? And somehow people resent my language in my book about my culture. You know, this book is coming from Uganda, from Buganda, in Luganda, and the people in the novel are in Uganda. For goodness sakes, they're going to speak their language, you know? But I am so good, I've written it in English. You know, 99% it's in English. But there are times when English lets me down. You know, that language can be racist when it's ready. You know, so you remember the part where somebody loses a husband. I was about to say Black Widow. I said, you know, Jennifer, maybe Black Widow is not the right word in Uganda, you know. But also I think it was Marachera who said you have to fight hair-raising duels with the language to make it do what you want it to do, you know? So if people are speaking Luganda, how can I write in the Queen's English? First of all, the sentences fall flat on the page. It's ridiculous, you know? So I had to find a language that works for me. But also, it's important for a reader in Britain, in America, and everywhere who's reading in European languages to just be kept on their toes that this story was written by a Ugandan. It came from, don't get too comfortable, okay? If you travel to Uganda, because we call reading traveling, isn't it? You lie back in your bed or in your sofa because it's the safest way to travel. And you go to these places, and you forget where you were. Sometimes you finish reading, and you're doing other things, but you're still back in that world. So why, if you're coming to Uganda, would you expect everything to sound exactly the way it sounds in London? So for me, and all of these ideas I developed after I was rejected. My first book was rejected. I was like, I really don't care. I'm never going to make money out of books, so I might as well do exactly what suits me. So this is where I started to work with a language that makes sense in Africa, you know. And you have no idea what it means to go back to your home country and people say to you, I could not believe you wrote it in our language. I cannot believe you wrote about our slums. I cannot believe you knew about my family. Yes, I've won awards. I've never got an award from Uganda, but my goodness, I was repaid by the readers in Uganda saying to me, Jennifer, you have no idea what you've done for us.
I mean, how can you say we won't clap to that?
Yeah, that is true. It is true. Just give us extra 5 minutes later.
Let's talk about Manchester Happened.
Yes.
So this is quite different from your other books in the sense that it's a collection of short stories. What was the shift like for you? Was it just like a continuation and then you just put it in short stories? Or did you have to like configure your mind to think, okay, I want to do this now. How should I go about it?
Okay, so when I went to Britain to study creative writing, I took most of the stories I was going to write with me, but not Manchester. This is why it's called Manchester Happened, because I just did not, well, I was not prepared for Britain. I migrated in 2001. And yes, I was stupid enough to imagine that I had made it when I got on the plane. Honestly, I thought I'd made it. And I went with this attitude that I'm going to write my book, get published, be given a lot of money. Within 10 years, I'll be traveling back to Uganda, buy a big house and a big car. And then I arrived in Britain. And the truth hit me. And I had bought only a one-way ticket to Britain. I swear to you, one time I sat outside on a bus stop and I cried. And I cursed my friend who didn't warn me. And so when I started to write, I decided that because when our parents migrated before, whenever they traveled, they used to write letters using aerograms. Then they would get a picture and put it in there and say, this is me in London with all the doves. And we would imagine heaven, you know. I said, this is not happening. I'm going to tell Uganda the truth. I mean, that truth. I put away all the ideas of what writing should be or what I should be doing, and I said, people need to know the truth. And this is why it opens with me telling them, immigrating is like leaving your home and going to live with your cousins because your parents don't have enough money or your dad has mismanaged his whatever, so you live with the cousins. But the cousins, and then I started on the cousins. I did all, look, I went to Britain to do my master's degree. I already had a first degree, and I had been teaching English in an international school. So I imagine I would walk in there and say, hello, I'm a teacher, can I have a job? Yeah, I arrived and I spoke my Ugandan English, and they were like, we'll call you. And I did a lot of interviews until my friends turned around and said, Jennifer, we all arrived here educated, okay? You're going to start in a nursing home. And they didn't even tell me what happens in a nursing home. And that's when I broke down and cried, you know. And I remember my friend saying, oh, Jennifer, we were all middle class. Forget it. Britain doesn't know it. So I started, and I'm glad that happened to me because then I grew up, you know. And I went through all the stages till I became a lecturer at a university. But I thought I should tell people where we start. And also the people who write to people in the West, oh, from Uganda, could you send me money for this and that and that? I needed to have a talk with them. But I also needed people to know what happens to you when you travel. So for example, whenever I go back home, my mother rings my siblings and says, ooh, the British ship's back, keep time. So there's a way we change while we are there, okay? And when you return home and people say, oh, you're so British, and it hurts, by the way. It does hurt. Because then people put you aside, oh, she won't understand. Oh, can you make some different food for her? Can you do that? And you're like, hang on a minute, I grew up here. Stop it, you know? So I needed to show people that, you know, when we come home, you treat us in a particular way as if we are different. But yes, we change a little bit in the way we see the world. So it was departure and the shock of Britain, and then the return and coming home, and you've frozen the Uganda you took in 2001 with you, and you come back in 2010, and that Uganda. So you go to Britain with the Uganda that is in 2001, and you nurture it, you keep it. Everything that happens to you, you keep saying, I have a home, I'll go back, they understand me, and everything will be fine. And then you go home, and that Uganda has gone away. Because, you know, they've been developing. And they speak Luganda, and you're like, what up? You don't even know how to speak the language, and you speak Luganda, and people say, oh, you speak old Luganda. So the short stories were a letter from me to Ugandans with the pictures that our parents used to send, because now we have emails. And also, you know how we stage pictures, you know? Yeah, you go and stand beside somebody's Mercedes. And you send it home. My car, my house. And you know how we borrow money, we get the credit cards when we are coming home? We do. We get credit cards and do shopping and come with a lot of money because we need to perform Britain for you. Because you're going to say, oh, she is a failure. One time I returned home with my hair like this, cut, kinky, and my brother picked me up at the airport, and then we arrived in the city, and she said, Jennifer, please, I know what you're like, but can I take you to a salon? We call it gonza, so just to soften it a little bit. And indeed, when I arrived home and my sisters saw me, they said, Jennifer, we know you're proud, but please, let us not look at you looking like that. You know, because this was back in 2004. Africans had not started doing the natural hair. It was straight perm and all of whatever. So I arrived from Britain with kinky hair, and they say, she is such a failure. You know, so it's all of those things that made me write that book.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
There's one.
There's one person there. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sunday Said. So my question is, excuse me, but I would like to pick a line from a particular poetry I read. It said, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. So I was wondering, when you said all of your books are a reflection of your home, what if the reflections of the home you were trying to portray did not accept it? How would you have felt that the home you were trying to portray rejected you? How would you have feel?
Now, first of all, thank God it didn't happen. So I didn't think about that. But as an author, we always prepare for that. And most of the time, sometimes you say things that don't make sense to the people immediately. But often they catch up, you know, because they are at home, and I moved away and went to Britain. But I'm looking at home through two lenses, the British cultural lens, okay, and the Ugandan. But also there's distance between home and me. There's that whole of Africa and then the sea, you know. So I'm seeing Uganda from a very different way. So chances are that I would present things that would not make sense to them immediately. But the hope is, even if it doesn't happen in a lifetime, the hope is that one day they'll catch up. So you will find that you're reading books that were published in the 40s, 50s, which were not very successful, but now are picking up. That's the dream of every author who has not been accepted. And I think that's what I would tell myself.
Thank you. Sorry, there's somebody. Yeah, there's someone there.
Well,
Oh,
I was.
Yes,
It's working.
Oh, okay. I was. Oh, all right. Okay, I've got to get some. Sorry. My question is about language.
Mm-hmm.
I learned in English, as you know, in Africa. I'm from Zimbabwe, and you go to school, and from grade 1, you're taught in English. But I speak Shona.
Yep.
But because I learned to read and write in English, when I'm writing my books, I'm writing in English. But also, especially when you're writing about middle-class characters, because we think in English and we write in English, when you're writing characters that are not, who primarily speak their own language, do you have to be like a double translator? Because for me, what I have experienced when writing characters that would primarily speak their own languages, I think about what I want to write in English, and then I think about my character, and I have to think how they would think in Shona and what they would say in Shona, and then I have to translate it back into English, but in a way where it doesn't sound like they're speaking English. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to know,
My
what
process.
your process is like, yeah.
Unlike you, I do speak my language better than I speak English, and I do think in my language. And so often I'm translating from Luganda into English, not the other way. And I only got to know that I was doing this when I was in England, and I could hear the way the English speak their English, okay? I was in Manchester. They speak a certain dialect. It's Mancunian. And then I was aware of the Queen's English, which is absolutely different. And then I was aware of the English we speak in Uganda. And believe me, in Uganda we thought we spoke good English. I arrived in Britain and I was like, okay, all right. But, and then I discovered that English that we speak in Uganda is exactly what I need for my books. So for me, there isn't that much translation. However, at the moment, I'm aware that I've been speaking English for a very long time as a first language for the last 20 years. So now I read the books, the projects that I'm working on, and the English is a little bit too English. And I am going to put aside 2 months to go back to Uganda and disguise myself a little bit and end up in the markets. I don't know whether you know people, those of you who live on the continent, but the most creative people in Africa are on the streets. You know those sellers of selling wear and whatever, they use language in a different way. And their minds are like this. What they were saying yesterday is not what they're saying today. And by the time it trickled down to us who speak English or the middle classes, it's too late, they've moved on. So for me, it's getting into the taxis and listening to the taxi drivers and how they speak, getting into the market and listening to how women, the language they're using, and then it activates something in me. And then I go back to writing. But that is happening because I've been away from Britain in Britain for a very long time. And I think it's time I returned. Otherwise, my books will suffer. And this is not a joke.
Okay, we have 2 more people in the back.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
I just want to say, being in the UK only recently, I think the British speak very bad English. Mm-hmm. And I just want to thank you for your body of work. And Manchester happened, for me Oxford happened, and I'm still feeling like an outsider only 9 months into it. But to Chintu, which I consider to be a modern classic for lots of reasons, but for one of the aspects of it is that it embodies African literature in a very broad way. It's, to me, genre bending. There's so many aspects of what I look to, the African Writers series and the elements in those stories. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to ask you is your perspective on it going into the international markets.
Yes.
Was there any experience in how publishers perceived that, particularly in trying to pigeonhole it versus how it was perceived on the continent? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I ask this is because going into bookstores in the UK. So in South Africa, you know, our works are pretty much merged on the shelves.
Yeah.
I went into a store in Summertown, and one of the chain stores, bookstores, and the African section is 2 shelves.
Yes.
And for me to find any of our works, it's not alphabetical.
No.
It's all merged by region.
Yeah.
And then it's, you know, you've got Chintu in there, and then there's a travel guide next to it. And that's how the shelf is. It's an absolute mess. So for me to try and find anything, I've got to think, okay, even if you wrote something in a different country, it won't be in your country as the author. It'll be in the country of the stories set.
Yeah, yeah.
So to find anything is just an absolute nightmare. And I've got photos to prove it.
Yes, international markets. It was, well, first of all, we know that it was difficult for me to get into the international market. So I started with Africa, and then I was taken, the Americans published it, and then the British published it. And the way, because my book did not fall into a specific category, in the beginning, I was put among African authors. That is Waterstones, yeah. And the award helped, because then they would put winner of this award, and then I would end up on the tables, not yet on the shelves, because the tables is where everybody, you know, arrives at. And then they haven't developed any idea of Ugandan literature. So it's still within African literature. But my publisher, because of her connection to Ake, she's always listening in on the panels and whatever, she's aware. And so she's very aggressive with the booksellers. My books should be put here, my books should be put here, and my books, she's been very good at that. So I've been lucky enough to escape the pigeonholing, yeah? But also because you can't say African historical novels. They don't look at it that way. So that way it ends up anywhere and everywhere, you know? So I've been quite lucky about that, but I know that other people suffer worse, you know, a way of, if the publisher doesn't push, and you should talk to your publisher to push and say, my book should be here, my book should be here, or this book falls into this category. Sometimes that helps. I wonder whether I've answered your question.
Yes, someone behind him. Yes, you.
Thank you. Morning. My name is Mutia, and I'm a huge, huge fan.
Hi, Mutia.
I just wanted to put that out there. My question is actually from one of the stories in Manchester happened. Let's tell the story properly. I've read that story about 3, maybe 5, maybe 7 times, because I really loved it. And what I want to know is, was it a deliberate decision, the way you... So we have a modern African in diaspora woman who has a life together, everything, and then something happened to her. So it felt like one of those things where you could be progressive, you could be, you know, have all of your crap together, you could do everything right, and then a man can still happen to you.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, you just have to pick yourself up and move on. So it's a different, and one of the things I love about your work is the way you portray African feminism as totally different from the Western point of view, in that we don't wait for men to give us legitimacy. We just go and do, because we have to survive.
Yeah.
So was it like a deliberate decision on your part, writing that story, portraying her in that manner, like, okay, girls, don't think that because you've done everything right, you know, this can't happen to you, kind of.
You see, that's my life. I am not saying that that's my story, But one, I grew up with some Western novels where at the end of the story, they walked in the sunset and everything was fine. You know, most of the books I grew up with, people faced problems, but at the end of it, they were resolved. I hadn't lived that life. You know, I was waiting for it. It wasn't happening. I was waiting for my handsome, tall, dark man happening and sweeping me off. He came and he went, and I was stayed, you know. Things were not happening to me the way I had read them in the books. One of the major things that drove me crazy was that in the Western books that I grew up with, you meet a bad person, and that bad person is bad and bad and bad and bad and bad. And then you meet a good person, and they're good and they're good and they're good and they're good. I had not met those people. I'm not one of them, you know, and they don't interest me. So for me, yes, it was a deliberate decision to reflect life the way I knew it in Uganda, okay? We have bad people, really bad people. And then one day you lose someone, and that bad person is the one who come and helps you. And you're like, what? I thought he was bad. And then you have good people, and you love them, and they do stuff to you. And you're like, what? You know, that for me is where the story is, okay? It's that unpredictability of African life, okay? And it's that promise that you may work hard, you may be a good person, but bad things are going to happen to you. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Great.
No, there's one.
One? Yes. Microphone this way.
Hi, hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
This is my first time at Ake. I've always wanted to come, and I'm just getting to know about you. And just hearing all what you said, I'm certainly going to pick your books downstairs.
Thank you.
But what I did wonder is how much does the information on the internet now, maybe not in the books you have produced previously, but if you are writing like the short stories in relation to Manchester, how much will the information on the internet about Africa, about Uganda, affect how you write? And I say this because now, when I call my friends or my friends call me from abroad, they tell me things that are happening in my backyard. And they will say something like, Fola, do you know that they are doing something in Sulere or in somewhere in Akwa Ibom? And I'm saying, guys, I've just come back from work. Let me check. They seem to be more current about what is happening in Nigeria. And maybe different from the time when the period you wrote about, when there was a lot more distance about how you could get information. It doesn't appear, now it's just like instantaneous.
Instant.
Something happens and they're already calling me. says, Fola, where are you? Your house is somewhere near there. I hope you're not there. So how much does all that information, bearing in mind that some of it may not be true, how much does it affect, or how much input does it come into your books? How does it affect how you think and your perspectives?
Okay, thanks for that question. The first thing is I'm not on social media at all. At all. So, okay, this is where I come from to catch up with the gossip. So I have made it a decision not to write about the Uganda after I left it. So, because I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I have to be so sure about what I'm talking about. So, and also, there's something about writing about current things that dates your writing. And it has a sell-by date, you know? So I stay away, this is why I stay away from politicians. I stay away from dictators because they are not even interesting. Dictators are not creative. A dictator today is the dictator in my father's time, is the dictator in my grandfather's time. So I stay away from all of that. I am interested in my culture, especially those things that are terrible about us. those things that we hide under the carpet. Now, those are the ones I pick out and put to the world. Oh my God, this is who we are. You know, for me, that will always be current, okay? And I prefer to do research, you know? So this is why most of my writing falls into historical writing, you know? Because, and also there's that record, pulling back what we've left behind, what we didn't record, and bring it to us and looking at it. So social media is wonderful, but it also can drive you crazy, you know? So I am not on it, but it's unavoidable because my sisters and my brothers are going to pick up things and send them to me. Like, did you know this? Did you know about this? Have you written about it? Do you know? They are asking me, this is happening in Uganda, you must write about this. I can't.
Wow, thank you for this great audience.
Thank you so much.
Jennifer, once again, you have been amazing. You've shared so many insights. You've warmed all the hearts. I see everybody smiling. Everybody had to laugh. Sometimes I listen to you and then I forgot that I'm just not a listener. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you as well. One thing that was very important for someone that grew up and was born in diaspora, thank you for portraying this self-entitlement, this kind of sense of I belong, I be, my culture has value. And that is so, so, so important. And you are basically leading the way and you inspire so many people on the continent, but also beyond. And that is, I think, so needed. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for writing these books. I've always believed that African literature is superior.
Oh, is
it is. And thank you for writing characters I see myself in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.